With that as an introduction, let me read the text to you, Revelation 13, beginning in verse 11. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great and the rich and the poor and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and he provides that no one should be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. I'd like to divide this text into 3 different compartments. We will look first of all at his character, secondly his con, and finally his control. First, the character of the false prophet. Verse 11, then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. This in the original language is another of the same kind, another as the first beast, who was a human being, a man. In fact, later we will see both of them, according to chapter 19 and verse 20, thrown alive into the lake of fire which burns with brimstone. Now notice, unlike the first beast that came up out of the sea, this one comes up out of the earth. Now some would argue that the sea, when we study the Antichrist, is emblematic of the Gentile nations, as we would see it referenced in Daniel 7, verses 2 and 3. So therefore they would say that the Antichrist will be a Gentile. And since the Greek word for earth can sometimes be used as a technical expression for the land of Israel, people will assume that the false prophet will be a Jew. I frankly do not find this compelling. I think that's reading into the text more than is there. Regarding the Antichrist, you will recall that the ancients considered the sea to be a reservoir of evil. And it's likened to the biblical abyss. And because in Revelation 11:7 and chapter 17, verse 8, we see this beast is not only coming up out of the sea, but it says that it's coming up out of the abyss. So we would understand that the sea and the abyss would be virtually synonymous here. But the ancients also considered the earth as being the land that is suspended over the sea or over the ocean. In Psalm 24:2, we read how they describe the earth as being founded upon the seas. And in chapter 136, verse 6 of Psalms, we read, to him who spread out the earth above the waters. So this is the mindset of the ancient. In fact, certain wastelands were considered to be the domain of noxious spirits, the natural habitat of demons, the place where many of the pagans considered various local deities to abide. And it's fascinating how Satan has carried these types of superstitions, this kind of thinking, into witchcraft, and we see some of this today. In fact, some of my Scottish ancestors would certainly remember what's called the Goodman's Croft, referring to the good man's croft. Goodman was the devil of the witches. It was also known as Helaman's Rig or the Black Folly. And this was considered to be a small patch of land that was dedicated to land spirits or fairies or the witches of the Goodman. And this would be a place where neither spade nor plow was ever permitted to touch. An uncultivated area, supposedly to be a place reserved for the devil, usually on the corners of fields. So when you trace back some of the origins, I believe the Lord's statement here, the beast coming up from the earth, refers to the way the first century individual would understand this to be that mysterious ground suspended above the sea. We might call it the underworld, a place that is foreboding, but certainly not as evil as the sea itself. So I would suggest that here the earth is emblematic of a less vile place than the sea, that place that remains under the curse, the earth, certainly a stark contrast to heaven. Now, certainly the false prophet will be demonized, but as we study the Word of God, we see that he will be less ferocious than the Antichrist. You will recall that the first beast, the Antichrist, had 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 crowns, and 7 blasphemous names, as we studied last week. But the second beast, the false prophet, notice in verse 11, will have 2 horns like a lamb. Now remember, horns, biblically, are symbolic of strength and power, so this man will have less strength and power than the Antichrist. Rather than being the rapacious and savage person like the Antichrist, whose character, you will recall, will be the amalgam of the leopard and the bear and the lion, the false prophet will appear to be as gentle as a lamb. He will be winsome. He will be a mild-mannered seducer, a silver-tongued orator. But dear friends, he will be a beguiling siren of hell that will lure the world into worshiping the Antichrist. Notice, the Lord tells us he spoke as a dragon, the dragon referring to Satan, so we see here that his words will be satanic. This world, dear friend, or this man will be to the world, dear friends, a pastor, a priest, a prophet that everyone will rally behind. I'm reminded of Jesus' warning in Matthew 7, verse 15. Remember, there he said, "Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." Old Testament prophets were easily recognized by the plain and hairy, coarse garments that they wore. In fact, if someone wanted to impersonate a prophet in those days, they would just merely put on those kinds of clothing. This is described in Zechariah 13:4 as those men who put on a hairy robe in order to deceive. And so Jesus' warning in Matthew 7 is very similar, because ancient shepherds wore woolen clothing that they took from their sheep. And so Jesus' analogy is simply this. He's warning of false prophets that will likewise try to impersonate a true prophet. They will look like a pastor. They will talk like a pastor. They will claim to speak the word of God like a pastor, but they will be a devil. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13, "For such men are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore, it is not surprising if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness." So, dear friends, this will be the character of the false prophet. Let's look secondly at his con, verse 12. "And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence." That is, the Antichrist will fully entrust to him his authority.